You were never meant to hear this. Not in school, not in church, not anywhere men gather to comfort themselves with clean versions of history. What I'm about to tell you is buried under corporate lies, sealed government records, and blood-stained snow. It begins with a telegraph sent in the winter of 1887 from Union Pacific's Camp 17. Supply shortages critical, men eating each other. 3 days later, rescue parties climbed 12 feet of frozen snow into Utah's Wasatch Mountains. They found the cook fires still burning. Steam rose from iron cauldrons. Inside, a stew thick with human remains. Of 127 men, only 18 survived. None spoke a word. For over a century, the official story was starvation, desperation, a freak tragedy of men turned against each other. But that's not the truth. The truth is worse. The truth is systematic, calculated, orchestrated by men in suits hundreds of miles away. And the worst part, this wasn't an accident. It was an experiment. Once you understand what happened in those mountains, you'll start seeing the same pattern everywhere, in wars, in markets, in your own life, and you'll never look at progress the same way again. The camp was a grave before the first shovel struck earth. A cluster of tents and rough-hewn barracks wedged between cliffs, blasted daily by dynamite and wind. Men arrived half-starved already, fleeing famine or war, lured by wages that promised freedom but delivered chains. Irish immigrants, freed slaves, veterans of Gettysburg and Antietam, all expendable in the race to stitch rails across America. Each mile through the mountains earned Union Pacific $48,000 in federal subsidies, triple the rate of flatland track. Every day mattered. Every delay cut into profits. So they sent crews deeper into winter's teeth, pushing them beyond reason, beyond safety, beyond humanity itself. Supplies were supposed to come weekly. They didn't. By November, trains stopped altogether. No notice, no explanation. The men rationed what they had: dried beans, hardtack, salted pork. By the third week, even the pork was gone. The hunger was no longer in their stomachs. It was in their eyes, in the way they looked at each other. And then Patrick Sullivan died, crushed under rock, the first body, the first choice: starve or survive. And survival always demands a price. Wilhelm Brenner was the cook, German immigrant, quiet, precise, too precise. His knives gleamed even as the men's faces grew hollow. He'd been a butcher before the war, learned to dress livestock, and later, human casualties when meat was meat and survival was survival. When Sullivan died, Brenner didn't flinch. He didn't mourn. He studied. He calculated. "Waste not," he whispered, running calloused fingers along shattered bone. And in the silence that followed, no one stopped him. That night, the men ate stew richer than they'd tasted in months. They didn't ask questions. Hunger erased questions. The next morning, every bowl was clean, and the line had been crossed. From that moment, Camp 17 wasn't a work camp. It was a feeding ground. Death became currency. Flesh became ration. And Brenner, the man who could transform human into sustenance without blinking, became something close to a priest. The company would later claim they didn't know. But documents found decades later, sealed memos, coded ledgers, tell another story. They knew exactly what they'd created. They wanted to see what men become when stripped of everything but hunger. The second death didn't look like an accident. Marcus Holloway collapsed hauling timber. Heart failure, they said. But his hands were clean. His body showed no struggle. And when Brenner carved him hours later, the meat was fresh. Too fresh. Patterns emerged. Men disappeared in the snow, claimed by avalanches no one witnessed. Tools went missing. Hammers, knives, only to reappear in Brenner's tent, scrubbed clean. Foreman Hartwell saw the pattern, but by then, he was eating too. Hunger had broken him. The men whispered at night. Some prayed, others plotted, but all of them ate. And with each meal, something shifted. A silence settled over camp. The songs and stories died. Eyes lingered on the weak. Arguments ended with sudden disappearances. The railroad company received telegrams begging for supplies. They sent none, not because they couldn't, but because they wouldn't. Each day without food was a test, a study in obedience, desperation, and the point where man becomes beast. And it wasn't just about Camp 17. It was about what they could make of us. All of us. By December, the men no longer scavenged for rabbits or roots. They scavenged for opportunity. Every slip on ice, every cough that didn't stop, potential meat. Hartwell pretended to lead, but Brenner ruled the camp now. He decided who lived and who fed the living. They say the first bite is the hardest. It isn't. The first bite is mercy, an act of survival. It's the 10th bite, the 50th, when hunger turns to craving. That damns you. And that's what happened here. Brenner seasoned the flesh, herbs, onions, pine resin. He masked the origin so completely that men convinced themselves they were eating deer. But deer don't scream in the night. Deer don't beg for their mothers. And yet, by spring, 109 men were gone. Not lost to the mountains. Consumed. Quietly. Systematically. A closed loop of hunger feeding hunger. Men eating men. To keep working. To keep laying track. To keep the machine of expansion alive. Progress, they called it. Civilization. But whose definition of civilization requires boiling your brother's flesh? The cover-up began before the snow melted. Company agents arrived with wagons of lime to scatter over blood-stained soil. Bodies were burned. Records destroyed. Survivors paid off or silenced under threat. Official reports blamed unprecedented winter storms and limited supply lines. No mention of Brenner. No mention of the stew. No mention of 109 men whose names disappeared from payroll ledgers overnight. But something stranger surfaced years later. Company letters hinting at human endurance studies. Internal memos calculating caloric yield per corpse. Quiet transfers of railroad funds into military research accounts. Understand this. Camp 17 wasn't an accident. It was a blueprint. A model for psychological control through deprivation. What happens when you remove comfort, strip morality, and watch men devour each other, literally and spiritually, for survival? The same tactics echo today. Different stage. Same game. Supply shortages. Manufactured crises. Watch closely next time shelves go empty. Hunger makes men obedient. And obedient men are easy to rule. Why haven't you heard this story? Because history is written by survivors. And in this case, the survivors were complicit. Hartwell and the 18 men who walked out of Camp 17 didn't testify. They obeyed. They took railroad payouts, land grants, and silence. Newspapers hinted at cannibalism, but buried it under patriotic headlines about conquering the West. The families of the missing were told their men wandered off or froze. Their bones, boiled clean, were dumped into mountain streams, scattered like they'd never existed. But the documents survive. Not in textbooks, not in museums, in private collections, in auction houses, in whispers between men who understand what power really is, the power to erase. This isn't just about the past. It's about the machinery behind every crisis you've ever lived through. War, recession, shortage, each one engineered to watch you break, to see how far they can push before you eat each other. Do you still think it ended in 1887? Or do you finally see the pattern? If you've listened this far, you're already changing. The veil is lifting. You see what they hide. Type this in the comments, twice, so you never forget what side you're on. The hunger ends with me. Say it again, out loud, because when the next engineered crisis comes, and it will, this phrase will remind you, you know their playbook. You know how they break men, and you refuse to be broken. Hartwell's journal, recovered from a sealed trunk in 1932, revealed details the company never intended to surface. Pages smeared with grease and blood described how men were selected for slaughter, chosen by exhaustion, injury, or descent. Brenner kept tallies. He calculated portions per body, rationing flesh with brutal efficiency. Each man consumed an average of 32 pounds of human meat over winter. He even recorded seasoning preferences. More pine resin for Irish, one entry reads. Less salt for veterans. They complain. This wasn't chaos. It was order. Ritual. A system evolving under starvation's pressure. By the end, men volunteered to die. Not out of sacrifice. Out of madness. The railroad buried this journal, calling it apocryphal. But the handwriting matches payroll signatures. The stains match human DNA. The evidence is undeniable, and it forces a question no historian wants to answer. If this happened once, why wouldn't they do it again? Brenner vanished after Camp 17. No trial, no grave. Some say he walked east into the plains, carrying his knives. Others claim the railroad hired him for quiet work, crisis kitchens during strikes, prison camps, war fronts. He appears faintly in other records. Meat shipments unaccounted for, camps with mysteriously low burial counts, a ghost following America's bloodiest expansions. And Hartwell. He lived long enough to drown in whiskey and silence. When asked about Camp 17, he'd mutter one phrase, "Waste not." Then he'd drink until words disappeared. The railroad thrived. Investors grew rich. The track they laid through those mountains still runs today. Tourists ride it, snapping photos, oblivious. Do you understand now? The line between civilization and savagery is one snowstorm, one missed paycheck, one empty shelf. And men with power know this. They've always known. The deeper truth isn't about cannibalism. It's about conditioning. Starvation rewires the brain. It erases morality. It breeds obedience. The men at Camp 17 weren't monsters. They were experiments in control. Proof that under the right pressure, anyone will turn. Look at history. Sieges, famines, wars, food withheld, hunger weaponized. Every time, the same result. Men obey. Men submit. Men forget who they are. Camp 17 wasn't isolated. It was a prototype, a case study for techniques still in use. In wars, prisons, economies. Create scarcity. Control distribution. Watch populations tear themselves apart while you sit above the chaos, untouched. And they're still doing it. Different tools, same blueprint. Every crisis you live through, watch who profits. Follow the hunger. When you strip men to nothing, cold, starving, hopeless, you learn what drives them. And you learn what drives you. The men who survived didn't just eat flesh. They ate identity. They became what the railroad wanted. Obedient, hollow, willing to build tracks through hell itself for a scrap of bread. This isn't a relic of the past. It's a mirror. Because the same forces test you daily. Maybe not with hunger, not yet, but with fear, debt, division, manufactured shortages. Each test strips another layer of your will. And most men fail without knowing they're being tested. You're not supposed to know this story. That's why it was buried. But once you know, you can't unknow. And once you see the pattern, you see it everywhere. Every shortage you've lived through, every emergency they manufactured, every time they told you it's for your safety. Camp 17 is America's skeleton in the closet. Proof that progress is built on consumption, not of land, but of men. Proof that the machine will grind you into fuel the moment you're no longer profitable. Do you think you're safe now? Or do you finally see the teeth beneath the smile? Brenner's knives were found decades later in an abandoned storage car. Still sharp, still stained, a silent testament to the hunger that once ruled those mountains. The company museum refused to display them. Too dark, too real. They prefer myths of bravery and conquest, not the truth of men eating men for corporate profit. But the knives remain. And so does the lesson. Hunger is the oldest form of control. When they own your food, they own you. Think of the next crisis, the next empty shelf, the next headline screaming shortage. Will you panic? Or will you remember this story and see through the game? Camp 17 isn't about the past. It's a warning, a blueprint for how power operates when no one is watching. Hunger breaks men. Knowledge breaks chains. You've heard the truth. Now decide what to do with it. Forget and stay blind. Or remember and stay free. Type the phrase again, below. The hunger ends with me. Because one day, when the snow falls and the trains stop coming, you'll need those words.